Welcome to the Safety Doc Podcast with your charismatic host and prominent safety expert, Dr. David Fritton. Be entertained and informed as the Safety Doc discusses both best and bizarre practices in safety preparation and crisis response. The truth will keep you safe. Follow Dr. Fritton on Twitter at SafetyPhD.
Great. Welcome to my interview today with Jennifer Fritton, and we are going to learn about rescue dogs. And also we're going to learn about what is a service dog, what's a comfort dog, comfort animal, some of the differences. And it's much more complicated working in the world of rescue dogs than what you might think. So Jennifer's going to help us to better understand that today. For those of you who are watching and listening, who are school administrators or else parents, or just people curious about how does the process work when you have a rescue dog that is responding to a call. So we're going to talk about those things today. So Jennifer, if you can start by telling us about your work with rescue dogs.
Well, I became involved with a volunteer team. The great majority of teams that you're going to find that do search and rescue, either canine or ground searchers, are going to be volunteer personnel. And I became involved just as kind of a field support person in 2010.
Okay.
Didn't have a dog, which was nice, just because there's a lot of things that the handler needs to learn as far as navigation, safety, ham radio, incident command systems, that type of stuff. So I served as field support for several years until I got my dog. It was a German Shepherd, and she's been training in area searches as AirSet.
Okay.
And our team works with, we're primarily a dog team, and we have dogs that do area search, which search large tracts of land, typically using air scent on the wind, air scent, and they find any human scent, living or deceased. We have the human remains detectors dogs, who are specialists, and they find only deceased.
Okay.
There are the disaster dogs, which are what most people are familiar with as far as...
Right, so like a building collapses or a tornado or some severe weather and the buildings are compromised. So,
Yeah.
so you're mentioning a group, so tell us, is this a group like that you train with on a regular basis, or is this, do they come from all around and you converge in one central area, or how does that work?
Yeah, my particular team is statewide. So you've got people that are kind of all over the state, and how we work it is you kind of work with train at least once a week in your regional areas, so like north, south, east, or west regional areas, and then once a month we get together for an all-day drill, so scenario-based drill.
Wow.
Which is just important, because if you don't put it together in practice in those scenarios, you're not going to know what to do in the real thing. So there's quite a bit of training and traveling that are involved.
And that's all done volunteer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yep.
And you did provide me a picture of your dog, and your dog's name is Serenade?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Okay.
She's a talker, so she was up to it.
Okay. So if you could help us understand the differences between rescue dogs, service animals, comfort animals. I think a lot of people confuse the terms or interchange those. And not only, like rescue dog, but sometimes if it's a small horse or rabbit or things like that. And what you're talking about is very different, but if you could help us get an understanding of those terms, that would really be great.
Okay. Well, to break them into groups, your service animals And right now, only dogs and miniature horses have a small mention. Your service animals are covered under the Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA. So they have rights under the ADA, which I can break that up a little bit more. Search and rescue dogs and comfort animals are not covered under the ADA. So your service dogs or service animals, but typically service dogs, are task-driven. They're
Okay.
trained to perform some sort of task, whether that's to pick things up, to guide a visually impaired person, to make, in the case of a psychiatric support dog, perhaps to maintain a certain amount of personal space around their handler.
Sure, sure.
But they're task-driven, and they're required by law to be allowed anywhere where their handler goes. So long as that the animal is under control and not causing a hazard or disturbance, they have to be allowed in restaurants, airplanes, taxis, anywhere. They're protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. Search and rescue dogs, excuse me, are they're not. They're aid dogs. They help the human community, but they're not required for. So say I have a search and rescue dog, but I do not have a disability that requires me to bring her anywhere. One sec.
So you're talking about a search and rescue dog. What does certification process for that look like?
It depends. Currently, there's a lot more push to have more regulation and uniformity. So there are your professional organizations in the search world, such as the National Association of Search and Rescue, FEMA, which a lot of people are familiar with. So there's much more of a push now to have that so that people know my dog is trained to, NASAR levels.
Okay.
Which more people will know what that means versus in the past you've had, you just kind of your regional, well, my dog is trained at this level above by my team. Which just at this point is you can have a dog that's trained really well and far exceeds and maybe even NASAR standards, but you could also have people coming in and maybe they've been to 3 practices.
Oh, okay.
So there's a push more for more uniformity.
Okay. So as I'm understanding it, search and rescue dogs being trained to a level largely for identifying if somebody is lost or if somebody is deceased in recovery of that.
Mm-hmm.
Service animal specific task, and that protected under ADA might be helping a person opening doors, might be keeping a certain amount of space around a person or other activities. How about comfort animals? We didn't probably touch on that at all.
Comfort animals are basically, they have no protections under the ADA. Essentially, they're pets. They have no more rights than your average pet, except that you can, if you have a comfort animal, then you've had a psychiatric professional say this person needs this animal for their psychiatric well-being, which allows you then to have that animal, say in housing situations where maybe there's no pet policy.
Okay.
And to take that animal also, I believe, on airlines and trains where usually there's no animal.
Do you know how that applies to schools at all?
A comfort dog differs from a psychiatric dog. I would say probably your district. It differs
Okay.
from district to district. They would not be a school for a service dog that the child requires because of their disability.
Right.
Technically has to accommodate, so long as that animal is not creating a disturbance
Right.
And interrupting class and just having the dog, and because the kids are interested in the dog, that's not enough of a disturbance to deny that child the dog. Whereas a comfort animal, it gets stickier in schools, especially when you start getting into the autistic aid dogs, which, so long as they're task oriented, and then they're a service dog.
So those are really questions to ask the parent to provide certification from a physician as to the need, or
what if it's there are two questions generally that, and again it gets stickier with school systems. Get some water.
a lot of people don't know this, but Jennifer is allergic to dogs. No, she's
It's
not.
a horrible,
She's not.
horrible conundrum. But I lost track of my.
We're talking about comfort animals and two questions.
Okay, for a service animal, whether it's in, like I said, the school districts are stickier, but in general, for a service animal, people are allowed to ask, is this animal required because of your disability? And what tasks is it trained to perform?
Okay.
They may not ask for proof. They may not ask for severity and nature of your disability. That's, those two questions are it. Is this animal required? And what tasks is it trained to perform? And that's all you're allowed to ask. The comfort animals, just for that, if it's a comfort animal, then yeah, you're probably allowed to say, well, you should then have a letter from your mental health professional.
Okay.
May I see that? But generally, that's only going to apply to the housing and transportation, as far as planes and trains. Schools, I'd say you might have to take it more on a case-by-case basis. If it's an autistic
Right.
animal,
Right.
that animal may be trained to be task-based as far as to interrupt pattern behaviors and things like that, in which case it's a service dog.
So you could ask for documentation that it's a service animal versus maybe a parent who is just saying the child or the animal acts in this capacity, and I'm the one making this determination. So now the dog is a service animal.
You do have to be able to say, have this, the dog has to be specially trained
Okay.
to perform these tasks. So somebody just going out and saying, well, my Chihuahua calms him down,
Right.
that's not sufficient.
Okay.
The dog has to be trained to interact in this environment and to do these specific tasks for this individual despite distractions and so on and so forth. As far as what documentation in schools, we'd have to look at for more information.
And I think what you're pointing out is just that it is a point of very individual decisions for schools, and then also things to consider as far as what documentation you might ask for. You might want to have these policy discussions ahead of time. So if this does happen, you do have a way to at least procedurally go forward with it and making sure that you're recognizing what questions you're able to ask under ADA and then what questions you're not able to ask. So I appreciate that. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. So you get a call tonight and someone is saying that it's the police are contacting you and saying, we need you and Serenade at this location because a 4-year-old boy with autism has wandered away from his home. Step me through what happens. Is that how you get contacted? Is it through the police or? Yeah,
generally the law enforcement organization is going to call the team dispatchers or the contact person for the team. So if I was that person, then yes, they might be calling me. But otherwise, they're going to call the team and say, this is our situation, what sort of resources might you have available. I would ask more questions as far as what's going on, what's the area, determine what kind of resources are needed, and then contact our team dispatchers, which would either put out a whole team call out or more of a measured response as far as, okay, we just need these folks versus everybody. And
how long does it take you typically then to mobilize? So if you did get that call either directly from law enforcement or from your team dispatch tonight, it's 7 o'clock, let's say the location, is within an hour of where you live. How fast does something like that come together?
generally, if it's within an hour and you've got multiple people who are able to respond in your area, then it kind of depends on. There's always the factors as far as, are your people at work? Can they get out of work? Do they have their stuff with them most of the time? Most people carry their equipment in their car. Most people are going to have to go home and get their dog.
Right.
So it could be anywhere from, if someone's at home and they got their dog and they get a call out and they're within an hour, then they might be able to be there within, an hour and 15 minutes. That 15 minutes as far as just grabbing the dog and putting your stuff on, getting the car going. So it could be anywhere from as close as just how long it takes to drive there to some folks have to wait till they're out of work. Others, if your air sent teams they live across the state, it might be, well, we can get these resources such as ground searchers and so on and so forth, but all our air sent teams live across the state. They might have a 3-hour drive, so it kind of depends on where your resources are.
So I think when we talked before, one of the things I was surprised at a little bit is it does take time to assemble, in most cases, the team and the resources, and sometimes when that's portrayed on television and so forth, it seems like something happens and then the resources are there right away, and really it takes, as you said, longer in a number of cases because people have to either leave work, go home, coordinate from different areas, which rescue dogs are best and teams are best situated to respond. And so another question I had was, so you're dispatched through law enforcement, either directly or law enforcement contacting your lead person. What happens, or have you ever seen where it's a parent possibly, or it could be an organization, maybe a group home, and they know someone like you, and they go directly to that person and say, they call and say, I need you to come over here with your dog because this happened, and try to make that connection, and they're not really going through a law enforcement. Has that happened, or is there a risk of that happening, or?
It does happen quite frequently.
Oh, goodness.
For whatever reason, they know about you, or they just say, for whatever reason, they know about dog teams, and they get on my child is lost, and they get on the computer and look it up. So yeah, it does, or they've maybe volunteered with a larger search effort in the past. So it does happen. Say if a parent calls me to say, hey, my child is missing, number one, I'm going to ask, have the police been called?
Right.
And we can we'll assume that the police have been called. And what I will do is ask them to give me, contact information. What is their name? Phone number? Can they give me the name and phone number of the law enforcement officer that's the lead on the situation? At which point, then I would be able to encourage that person, the parent, to, I'll give this law enforcement officer a call. Why don't you go ahead and let them know that you've called me?
Right.
And then I am also going to take that contact information for law enforcement, call them, let them know, hey, I've got this parent in this situation, called me, this is who I am, these are our capabilities, this is what we're available for, and just, offer our services to let them know, we're out there.
So have there been situations where you've responded, but then there's also been self-dispatchers who haven't been contacted by law enforcement, and maybe they're also responding and perhaps not checking in a centralized site, and you get there and you're starting a rescue, and all of a sudden, here's another team which we weren't aware of. Does that seem, some people just doing that to try to help out, but just responding to an area and immediately starting to search without making the contacts with law enforcement and so forth?
That also regretfully happens fairly frequently. Thankfully not as far as another dog team on a search that I've been on, but it does happen fairly frequently, and it's one of the hallmarks of teams that is not professional, just because it is problematic if you've got, especially if you've got somebody who's living, then you've got a lot of balls in the air. You need to go through that incident management system, know what your resources are and where they are and how to manage them. And if you've just got loose cannons coming in and they're messing up, there are certain areas that are good for dogs to search, and other areas that are not, and other ways you need to manage your resources when you're setting up a search.
Sure.
And if you have unknown resources just coming in and dispatching themselves and I think I'll just go look over here, then they can really be messing up and interfering with your search and quite possibly damaging your ability to find that person. If it's a deceased subject, then same thing, they could be damaging your ability to find that person. If they're not all that professional where they're coming through and self-dispatching, then if they do come across any articles or evidence or the individual in question, they could be damaging that evidence. So it's problematic.
And I can envision from a school district standpoint where the school district is probably going to contact law enforcement, but then of course, if a child by chance, would wander away from a playground or something like that, text messages from teachers or from a student that contacts a parent, and the parent, knows someone that does have a rescue dog or some type of search team, and all of a sudden that person shows up. So I think what you've indicated is really for the lead administrators in the school to make sure they're working with police and that there's some kind of check-in point for whoever is responding. And maybe that's where the school could have some of their additional staff, on a perimeter, that if somebody is coming in, with their truck and they say, I'm here with a rescue dog, that then they are directed to law enforcement to check in, and not that it's like, okay, you're here, but I didn't realize that you were not part of the rescue, the coordinated rescue effort, so that person then parks and goes off and does something, as you said, that could be interfering with the overall rescue effort. So how does it work? We talked, you said if there's a body of water around, immediately to dispatch people, whatever resources proximal to that area, to make sure that that risk, was minimized as much as possible of having somebody lost getting near water. How do you know the area that you've covered? So you have your rescue dog and you're out there and you're with your team, and how do you communicate with each other and set up that, we're going to go through this section, we're going to go through this section, so it's not random overlapping or that you're missing areas? I would imagine that's pretty complicated.
Yeah, it certainly can be. And when you're first, say, certainly if you've got a missing child, number one, you're going to get oodles of people converging on the scene. Your community people are going to hear about it. They're going to want to come and help. So like you said, get somebody to contain your scene, have a staging area where you send them there to sign in, and then stay there until we can do something with you. As far as setting up the search and managing it, the first person on the scene is going to be getting information either from law enforcement or from, if the law enforcement doesn't have it, they might be asking the teacher, the parent, the school administrator.
Okay.
Gathering that vital information about the student, about the subject, about hazards in the area. An IEP can actually, especially if you're talking about a student with any type of disability, it's got a lot of information on it. So if they can pull an IEP and have it available, that's great.
Okay. Well, that's interesting. And you mentioned hazards in the area. That's a question I wouldn't have thought of initially. Meeting with the building principal, and the principal, would say, well, yeah, there's a real marshy area in back of the woods at the edge of the playground, or there's some barbed wire fencing that's not too far away, or this crosses over into a farmer's field, but then beyond that, so all of those things. And then as far as what would you pull from the IEP? What would you?
Well, especially if you're, say we've got our autistic child, what are their capabilities? What are their weaknesses? Their strengths? Are they verbal? Are they afraid of animals? Will they evade? What are they attracted to? A lot of autistic kids are attracted to water or to large machinery, trains, big steeples, things like what is a draw for them? Lights and stuff like that.
Right.
So if we can say, well, geez, there's a river back here, and there are train tracks over here, and here's the clock tower that booms every once in a while.
Right.
You might have an idea as far as these are priorities. So if you're setting up your search sectors, number one, you've got lost person behavior. There's probabilities and patterns as far as this individual fits into this group of subjects. And so probabilities say this is generally what they do. So you can kind of get your overall perimeter set up and then start assigning.
So would you say that it might be that a probability would be that they're going to, and I don't know this, but maybe one probability set would be this person would tend to become frightened, and they're only going to go so far, and then they're probably just going to stay in that location.
Well, if we stick with the autistic kids, generally they're found within, like 95% of them are found within a 10-mile radius.
Okay.
25% are found within a quarter-mile radius. Within that, then it's also, I think, some large percentage are found within some sort of structure. So it can tell you this is the distance that they're generally found, and these are the environments in which they're generally found. And these are the hallmarks of this particular group, whether it's autistic or somebody with Alzheimer's or a suicidal individual. They tend to act in patterns that fit that kind of group.
So you mentioned suicidal, and that is something also with school districts that could be a reason why they would be contacting for rescue dogs if a student is missing and has expressed risk of harm to self. What might be a pattern you would look for there, or how would that inform your search if you knew someone was it harmed to, or had expressed that they were considering harm to self?
Well, you'd be gathering some information as far as, have they done this before, that type of stuff. How familiar are they with the area? But just for a suicidal individual in particular, most of the time they're found fairly close, off a trail, off a road. I mean, I think it's no more than 1,000 feet, because most of the time your suicidal individuals, they want to go somewhere generally that has some sort of meaning for them, whether it's just, oh, I like watching the water, so maybe they'll go down by the water.
Right.
And they want enough privacy to be able, to do the deed if that's where they're going. But most of the time, they also want to be found eventually.
Right.
So
Right.
generally, they're usually found off of trails fairly close by.
And that's been my experience in working as a sheriff's department critical incident debriefer at a county level, is that persons who have suicidal tendencies are either are located very close to areas where they would presume that they would be found. And then you gave some incredible information on the IEP. I was thinking back, a number of people probably haven't seen it, but the movie What's Eating Gilbert Grape, Arnie, Leonardo DiCaprio playing a young, probably 12-ish, 13-year-old boy with autism, and one thing Arnie does is he continues to climb up the water tower, and it needs to be brought down. But so, how do you communicate? Do you have a two-way radio? Is it cell phone, or how do you communicate when you're out on a search? And we're kind of getting toward the end. You've given wonderful insight, and I think answered some key questions for, again, school administrators, parents, anyone with a question of just really how does this all work? I mean, where they have then starting points where they can go and look for more specific information. And I'll do a little summary toward the end, but is it two-way radios, or how do you make sure that you're not searching, but, whoa, this person needs to be further over here, or else, like, I've just found, like a backpack or something like that, and I'm not sure if this belongs to the boy we're searching for, or...
Well, my team uses ham radios, so everybody coming in has to go through their training, and you have to get a ham radio license.
Okay.
That's not required for all teams, but it's easier. Some folks use family radios, some use your cell phones, and we will use cell phones to a certain degree at times. But there's not always cell signals, especially out in some of the areas you're looking for. And then we have radio protocols as far as communicating.
Okay. Are you ever GPS units to know where you're at, and do you, for example, use cell phones and take a picture and say, like, here's where I'm at, like right now, maybe if there's like a field ahead of you or something, like here's where, or here's like the item I found, and get that back, or does that, am I kind of getting a little into the science fiction realm on that?
Well, we do use GPS.
Yeah.
Generally, your actual handheld GPS units, because they're a lot more accurate, and map and compass, because it's many times I've been out and GPS will just go, no, that's not us. So everybody's got to learn how to use a map, how to use a compass,
Okay.
How to plot points, how to triangulate points with a map and a compass.
Wow.
How to be able to describe where you are. I mean, if you're out in the middle of the national forest, then you better be able to get, maybe you found this person. Number one, can you get back out?
Right.
And number two, can you get people to you? Maybe you've got somebody who's severely injured. You found them, but now you have to be able to get your rescuers to
Okay.
your subject.
Okay.
So yeah, navigation is a big part. Being able to communicate over long distance is a big part. As far as your cell phones, if there's a signal, so say there might be, because ham radios are loud. If I got a ham radio, if everybody's been sitting next to a security guy and the ham radio's going blah, 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 blah.
Right.
So say perhaps we are looking for a suicidal individual. Most of the time you've got family members and friends in the area back at incident command. And hopefully they're removed to a certain degree so they're not hearing all this stuff. But you want to be able to, number one, you've got your radio protocols to kind of help control that. Otherwise you might say, communicate on the radio that you will have incident command call you, or you will be calling into incident command so that you can excuse me, have a more private conversation to let them know what you found, what do they want to do with it, just mark it, take a picture of it.
Right.
Sometimes, yeah, it might be, hey, I found this boot print. Is this the print of the person that we're looking for? I might take a picture of it. Technology's awesome, and if there's a signal, I can shoot it, I can email it back to incident command. They can take it over to mom and say, does this look like the print from your boot?
Wow.
So there's, technology is helpful, but if you count on it, you might find yourself literally up a creek.
So I did an interview with Scott Myers out of ISS 24/7. ISS 24/7 provides large venue security for the National Football League, NASCAR, a number of like shopping malls, large venues of 80,000, 100,000 people. And one of the things he was sharing just in the last year or two, their technology is very app-based, and to the point of being able to document things through taking pictures, time stamping. They're not GPS yet because they're typically not in like a search mode. I mean, they might be like be on the lookout for something, but that was one thing he talked about. And as he talked about that, and I knew we talked today, how is there a process where you document, like, this is where I am at this time, and, you know, it's 3:30 now, it's 4:30, this is where I am, it's 5:30, so how does that information, I guess, get fed, or it gets fed back? Every 15 minutes, do you check back in with a dispatcher, and then they kind of manage this centrally?
Yeah, usually either incident command or there'll be a separate person on comms on your radios.
Okay.
Whose responsibility it is to do a status check of your teams. Where are you? You know, give me a par. How many? What's your status? What are your people? How's your dog doing? How much percentage are you through your search? How you doing? So yeah, definitely they want to keep track of your folks, where they are, how they're doing.
So you mentioned how your dog is doing. Is there like a fatigue level of a dog can search for 30, 45 minutes and then there's a decline in
It depends on the
capacity
dog.
of the dog, or?
It depends on the dog, and it depends on the terrain and the conditions.
Okay.
So say if we're going through a cornfield in mid-July at noon, number one, we're not going to be getting much scent. But also, it's going to be really hot. It's going to be miserable.
Right.
It's going to be, that dog is not going to be able to work a fraction of the time as long as mid-November through wooded area, but fairly standard woods or fields. And then you've got, I've got a German Shepherd who's got a double coat, who can work fairly well in most climates.
Okay.
Versus somebody else who might have some sort of smooth-coated or like a big heavy Labrador, with maybe a big heavy black Labrador might be getting hotter faster. So it kind of depends on the dog, on the weather, on the conditions,
Okay.
on exactly how long they're going to be able to work. In perfect conditions with a fresh dog, quite frequently you'll have to stop them in order to have them take a break and force them to take a break.
Wow.
Because these tend to be pretty intense dogs.
Right.
And so generally they don't want to stop.
How about, as we close, something that stands out as one of your more memorable calls, and maybe a call that specifically had a positive resolution to it?
Well, there's memorable ones. There's ones that really that made an impact for various reasons. Ones that had a positive. Hopefully, there's not as many of those. But there was one where I was on, and it was for a. Or you want one that I particularly was on, or?
It can, yeah, anything that you want to share.
Okay. The one memorable one that I wasn't on that search, but they had an elderly lady with dementia went out and in a pretty remote area, a lot of retaining ponds and things like that.
Okay.
And high fences and locks and things like that, and barbed wire over the top, that type of. And they had dogs out and people out searching all over the place. And one of the areas that Incident Command was saying, she's old, she can't get through there.
Okay.
Just go by it. And my colleague was searching with her yellow lab, and the lab said no. So we have to go this way. And so
right.
the handler trusted their dog. And went to go check it out. And it was a retaining pond, and at this point it was dark, so they're using flashlights. So it's a retaining pond with this giant fence around it that's all locked. And the dog is insistent that we have to go in there. So they're shining their flashlights across, and in the middle of the retaining pond there's some deadfall, and there's just the top of this lady's, her nose and her eyes sticking up. And she's holding on to this branch to keep her upright. And so thankfully they caught her eyes and just the top of her head, because she had somehow gotten in there, which can be the hallmark of somebody with dementia or Alzheimer's, is they go straight through, and if they run into an obstacle they keep going until they physically can't move anymore.
Okay.
And so she'd somehow gotten through it or gotten over it. I don't know if they ever figured out how exactly she got in there. But yeah, they found her basically just in time.
Okay.
Because she's an older lady, it's getting dark, it's getting colder. So that was interesting, just because she should not have been able to get in there. And she did. And thankfully the dog was insistent, and the handler trusted her dog. So it wouldn't have been too much longer, and that person would have gone down, and we would have had a very different outcome.
So I'm going to summarize, in what you mentioned too, is I think talking about perimeters, and if I'm a school administrator and looking at the area around my school and what I'm thinking is secure and what's not secure, to really maybe scrutinize that in a whole different way. Is this really an area that is going to be could be penetrated by a very determined, young student with autism, as far as working through a fence or working over a fence or something like that. So some of the main points. One is the process of dispatch, that this is done through, appropriately it's done through law enforcement. So if you are contacting, rifling through the internet, probably doing the search, and if you're contacted or anyone else is contacted, their response should be, have you contacted law enforcement? And then if they haven't, then to get that person's information, direct that person to contact law enforcement, and then I believe you would do a follow-up with law enforcement saying, I was contacted by this person, this is what they said to me, they said now that they were going to contact you. And also, so as I'm sharing this for, let's say, school administrators, or just if it is a community and it is a search, involving a lot of community members that turn out because they hear this on the news, that to have staging areas where people check in, even if it's someone who might not have a rescue dog, but someone who wants to come and be a part of the search, brings their flashlights and whatever and wants to start, walking, that they don't go off on their own and do that there's a coordinated effort. You said there's the check-in once people have been dispatched, that they are checking back in then at a centralized location, so areas that have been covered, and you can start to timestamp and look at those things. Because I see self-dispatch, and I've seen this in active shooter situations, self-dispatch to be a significant issue for site management. And this is different in some extent, but also not different in the way that if people do hear about this, just the good nature of, I think, a lot of people, if they have the time and the availability to bring themselves to the scene, and so they can participate in what they anticipate is going to be a search, or they just start with another group and say, we're going to take this area and then maybe meet up again. I guess what I'm doing is I'm urging you as an administrator, or if you're a parent watching this, to understand that this process would be centralized. So there might be people, you might have a question of, well, why can't we just get these people out? Well, it's because it's going to compromise the overall search. If there's evidence, if there's overlapping of people searching in specific areas, ignoring other areas that might be more prevalent per the pattern of, again, you indicated, if it was somebody with autism, railroad tracks, machinery, going inside of structures, elevated structures. And then one of the things that I don't think happens enough is, and I'm trying to accomplish through this video, is letting people know ahead of time what to expect. Because if I'm a school administrator, which I was for a number of years, and a child would have wandered away, I wouldn't have had any real idea of what someone in your capacity responding with serenade, what your role would have been, who you would have been working with. I wouldn't have understood how to communicate that to the parent. I would have needed a debriefing. Perhaps as soon as you were on scene, my expectation would have been, you'd be out right away, but maybe you need to wait for part of your team because there's an area you're going to cover. You're coordinating with law enforcement. So when these things, I think, are communicated to teachers at a start of year in service, just within 10 or 15 minutes as part of an overall school safety, but saying, we do have students with autism or with other needs, and if they do wander off campus or we're off site at some field trip or something, you go to the corn maze and around Halloween and something like that, and all of a sudden something happens. One is, don't panic. Identify where your terrain, and if you are unfamiliar with that, to identify, let's say you're at a pumpkin patch and you find the person who's in charge there, if it's the farmer or whatever, and say, okay, what's around here? Is there any water? Is there any whatever? So they can start to fill you in on some of that.
Google Maps.
Google Maps, as you said, and then also, I think that over-reliance on technology, which is really urging people not to go out and start to self-dispatch, saying, well, I've got my cell phone connection right now, and I can bring up my Garmin map, and I can follow it, and then all of a sudden, the connection's gone. So we've lost that. So just wrapping up here, I think that's about all the points I want to communicate. The very last question before we end: if someone wants to learn more about rescue dogs or being part of a rescue team, even if they don't have a dog, who should they contact, or how do they look that up on the internet?
If they're interested in learning more about search and rescue dogs, you can ask your local law enforcement agencies.
Okay.
Are there teams you use? Are there teams that you're familiar with? You can ask local vets. You can do an internet search for search and rescue. You kind of need to have an idea of what makes a professional team versus a not so professional team.
So that might be where to go to law enforcement, because they'll be able to help you out.
And I can say, for one point, you were talking about as administrators, and say if we've got an autistic student that's suddenly, like here, we know we've got railroad tracks up there, we've got a river.
Right.
There's no reason you can't get people with, sign them out, say, you guys, give me your cell phones, you go there, and be watching along that river, and don't you move. We'll be coming back and forth. And you folks go to those railroad tracks. So maybe you can, so long as you keep track of those people, if you know you have a student that's going to be drawn to those areas that can be quite dangerous, keep track of them, but you can send them out, and when law enforcement gets there, you can say, I've got these people right there.
Okay.
And they're containing that hazard. So hopefully, if the student hasn't made it there yet, you've got those folks that are there and ready to intercept them.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, because otherwise, thanks for bringing that up, because that could be a delay when you have resources that you could put in to certain areas, and then when your ICS responds and your police are there, you can say, we've got these people in these locations right now.
Yeah, you just need to keep track of who's where and when, and make sure that they're aware that they need to be checking in and not just herring off one another.
All right. We are going to wrap this up. I, again, am with Jennifer Fritton, and we were having a discussion of rescue dogs, among other discussions, service animals, comfort animals, search and rescue. Jennifer is a handler for Serenade, a rescue dog, and definitely contributes very positively to the safety and well-being of many, many people. So thank you for your work, Jennifer, and thank you for your time today.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Hi, everyone. That was a fascinating interview with Jennifer, and I appreciate her time. It's unfortunate she had a little bit of a cough, but the information is incredibly valuable. Some points I took away from the interview. One, make sure that you involve law enforcement whenever you contact or have rescuers involved in any type of rescue effort, that is not being driven by self-dispatched individuals, that it is a coordinated effort. I was surprised actually when Jennifer indicated the frequency at which self-dispatched people show up on a scene, and then also the frequency at which they kind of undertake parts of a search and rescue on their own and can end up compromising the search and rescue. So as a parent, school administrator, to understand that if that call goes out, there's going to be a number of people responding, that needs to be directed through law enforcement, and then that is the most effective way to handle that. So very interesting, and Jennifer has shared with me the majority of calls that are school related tend to be students with autism that do wander from the school, particularly younger students. And I like at the end how she indicated, don't hesitate if you're an administrator and there is a body of water, busy road, railroad tracks, whatever nearby, to dispatch certain staff to those areas and say, just go there and observe and be in contact. We have your cell phone number, and then once police arrive on the scene, then police can jump in and take it from there. So you're protecting, hopefully those vital areas which might be most prone to attracting a child with autism. So I appreciate the interview with Jennifer. Very fascinating to be a rescue dog handler and then to respond to various calls. I wanted to just bring closure to a few things from last week. I mentioned I had a 150-foot rope light, a red rope light. It did arrive, and actually we had a snowstorm warning. So I looked at the radar and knew I had about 2 hours to get outside, and it was about 15 degrees, and put up this rope light. I did it on my own, and actually it was remarkably flexible for 150-foot rope light. And it was funny because I put it up and I realized I had about 30 extra feet. I couldn't go up any higher with the ladder, so I kind of snaked it back to the trunk and then worked it down like a candy cane. And I was outside later, and one of my neighbors was walking by, and I was taking a picture of it. And one of my neighbors was walking by. He said, "Boy, that's really cool." And I'm thinking, "All right, I appreciate that," but it was completely by chance that it ended up the way that it did. So there have been other people who have complimented on it. So I'll just toss a little picture up right here if you're obviously watching this on YouTube. But yeah, I'm really happy with the light, and I just like the effect that it has. So, and it wasn't that cold. I thought it was cold, but I didn't really feel it in my hands, and the light was flexible. So I had I like to go running, pretty much every night. But and last year was the first time in it's Wisconsin, very cold, and I slipped a few times when I was running, and that hadn't happened before. And I've learned to kind of roll as you fall, and that's kind of a protective mechanism. Nothing significant, but I had some cleats that I bought that would strap onto the shoes, and they snapped like the first time I put them on. So I'm like, I splurged, got a better pair, so those will be arriving soon. Because it's just too risky to go out and do that stuff, and do any type of running or even walking unless you have something like that. So yeah, but I think last year though was the first time I can remember that I fell, and I do wear like a yellow vest that's reflective and all that, because at one time I almost got hit by a car. I had a neighbor, and he would go out running at night, and the guy wore all black, like nothing reflective, so he was like a ninja running. And I think someone actually wrote a letter to the editor once, kind of calling him out on it, like, "Dude, don't do this. You're going to get hit by a car." So what I'm going to do in the next video, it'll come out on December 26th. That's going to be more introspective. I'm going to talk about just some of the safety from more of a agency and purpose perspective. Just a lot of anecdotal stories. I mean, I think the whole thing is going to be anecdotal stories that from my youth and coming into adulthood, different elements that develop my agency, my purpose, which I think are very important factors when it comes to safety, especially school safety for youth. What I hear more and more is a struggle to have youth identify what their agency is, what their purpose in life is, the ability to set goals. And I'm going to again reflect on some very interesting parts of that as I went through my life, and then maybe some ideas that I have, and things I'm going to incorporate into some of my books that will be released here before too long. So again, thank you to Sprigeo for supporting the show, SPRIGEO. And Sprigeo is a leader in school safety systems and online reporting. You can find out more on their website, www.sprigeo.com, SPRIGEO. If you talk to Joe, say David, the Safety Doc, sent you. Thank you for the support of ISS 24/7 and for the 405 Media out of Los Angeles, Orange County. John and the good folks at the 405 Media supporting this Safety Doc podcast. And some changes in store, very positive here for the 405 and the Safety Doc podcast, which I'll talk about in some upcoming podcasts. But for right now, I'm wishing you a safe and happy holiday season.